Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with a response to Defending Platonic Forms posted by JohananRaatz. The video title that he posted is precisely Defending Platonic Forms. I typed exactly those words into YouTube and got his video as the first result, so you should be able to find that if you're interested. He posted this almost a year ago, and he posted it, he says, about a year or so after I posted some sort of a challenge to him on debating Platonic forms, maybe a comment or something. So he was late getting back to me, and when he did get back to me, I was very busy, so I'm late getting back to him. But if you're interested still, if the debate on Platonic forms is still going, then perhaps you'll be interested in what we have to say here. Now, at 1 minute 38 in his video, he defines knowledge as justified, true belief. I would quibble with that, but we'll leave it for now. We might have to come back to that. At 1 minute and 52 seconds, he says, we can't just say that a statement is true. We have to provide an argument for that statement. Now that's a revealing thing for him to say there. A statement might be true because you've offered a valid argument for this statement, but the argument would be a true argument because of what? Because it reflects reality. Now, for him to think that things refer to reality is very difficult, this JohananRaatz character. Let's go forward just a bit, though. Let's continue with his statement. We have to provide an argument for that statement, or we have to ground it. The trouble is that we don't know if these premises themselves are true. So any argument you give, you have to give another argument for why it's true, but then is that argument true? So you give one for that, and so on. Okay. You do have to have some base from which to start. Something which you know is true. Something which, as he points out, that you don't have to provide an argument or premises or proof of. Now, I don't want to give it away. I could just say it right off, but let's go to a quick quote from Aristotle, The Posterior Analytics. This is from Book 1, Chapter 2. I have McKeon's translation, and on that it's on page 12. It's in paragraph 25 nonetheless. The premises must be primary and indemonstrable. In other words, you cannot give a demonstration of premises. They have to be primary, they have to be first, they have to be the groundwork from which you begin. They have to be indemonstrable, do not need to be demonstrated, says Aristotle. That's what a premise is. Otherwise, they will require demonstration in order to be known. As JohananRaatz says, we're going to require demonstration for these premises. Since to have knowledge of things which are demonstrable means precisely to have a demonstration of them. So if it can be demonstrated, in order for you to know about it, you need a demonstration of it. That's the only way to know about it. Well, what about things which cannot be demonstrated and you know? That is called ostensible, or sensory knowledge. That's going to be a problem for him, for JohananRaatz, because knowledge for him can't mean sensory data for some reason. And so I'm going to have to belabor this point a little bit. All knowledge is only and nothing but sensory data. He thinks that sensory data is just some other category that's a bit of a problem, and then there are these ideas and stuff, and that's the real knowledge. That's what JohananRaatz thinks. That's not true. Anything that is real knowledge is empirical data. Let me give a couple of examples. there's a law of economics that bad money drives out good. By bad money, we mean money that the value, intrinsic value of it can be changed arbitrarily. Good money would be money that's tied to a certain weight of gold, and gold is definable in pure terms and so on. Bad money drives good money out of economies. That is an abstract law. It may have lots of explanations as to why it happens, but ultimately, when it comes right down to it, it means that there's an increase of this type of money in an economy and a decrease in this type of money. It comes down to real-world, actual physical things. Here's another example. Mass attracts matter. That's, Newton's law of gravity. That comes down to actual things bumping into each other or not. Every single bit of knowledge that you could name, if it is knowledge about empirical facts. The laws of thermodynamics, obviously, are all knowledge about empirical facts. Even knowledge about if you had some really good rule or a law of psychology where you could tell psychologically always this follows that. That comes down to knowledge about the empirical facts of humans doing things, or the empirical facts of the human's brain's chemicals doing things. You will never find any knowledge at all that does not reduce to empirical facts and real data in the real world. The one example that came to my mind that would possibly come to JohananRaatz's mind is imaginary numbers in math, or even negative numbers. But those are, when you define what an imaginary number is or what a negative number is, they come down to facts in the real world. An imaginary number is blah 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 from such and such, extrapolated from these things which were invented by mathematics of the real world. It just always has to come back to the real world. There are things that don't, like the definition of God, or gremlins, or the debate whether Santa Claus's beard is too long. These things have no basis in reality, and they are rightly disregarded as fantasy, and rational people leave those things aside as ridiculous wastes of time. Santa Claus's beard and gremlins and God are ridiculous because they do not reduce to actual facts, which means they don't talk about reality. Now let's see if we can. I've only just started, and I think I've already laid waste to his whole idea. He's defending Platonic forms, and that's ridiculous. Everything, all knowledge reduces to reality. There is no disconnected knowledge anywhere else. It would be knowledge of nothing. That's not knowledge. Now at 2 minutes and 25 seconds he says, the problem is that we now have an infinite regress and we need an infinite number of premises to justify our knowledge. Right? Each premises needs an explanation, which needs a premise to explain it, which needs a premise, and so on. But not if you accept physical reality as the base of all knowledge. Then all you have to do is get it back down to physical reality. Now, perhaps now is the best time to address this thing that he brings up later, these guys that trying to use number theory to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. They wrote this 230 or 280 page book, this big book, big for that subject anyway. 1 + 1 = 2, and they couldn't prove it. Now, that's laughable. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Watch this. Here's a pen. That's one pen. There's another one. I'm going to count them. 1, 2, there's 2 pens. That is not to be argued against. That is not to be doubted. Only an imbecile or a college professor would look at me holding these 2 pens and say, can you prove you have 2 pens? Only an imbecile, a retard, or a Platonist would say, prove that you have 2 pens, when here I hold 2 pens. Physical reality and the evidence from our senses are the base of all knowledge, and you cannot get more basic than that. So JohananRaatz here, trying to come back to more basic premises and more basic premises, and he says we have an infinite regress. You don't have to regress any further than basic physical facts. You don't have to go any further to prove that 1 plus 1 equals 2 than to put 1 next to 1 and have 2. And they're in front of your eyes and you know it. Now, if number theory were correct, this theory that these mathematicians use to try to prove 1 plus 1, if it were correct, it would be correct because they start with facts like 1 plus 1 equals 2 and just take those as a fact that no one's going to argue with and no one can argue with. Who could possibly argue with that? If it were true, it's because they take those things as fact that can't be proven. So to take something else as a fact which needn't be proven and then try to prove things that are facts which can't be proven is only the job of a modern college professor or a mental retard, which I think, ladies and gentlemen, many of you agree was probably not, there's probably not much of a difference between the two. Professor is a retard as a professor is a retard. Now, I've offered our way around the whole question of how do we get some basic premises. Well, we get something like this, where it's just right in front of your face. There's no one who can argue, and anyone who does argue, you just have to turn away from them and leave them out of the conversation because they're obviously a mental retard or a Platonist or a college professor, and those people can't be talked to meaningfully. So how do we prove these things? Quote from 2 minutes and 48 seconds into his video. The only way around this is to say that these arguments are intrinsically true, or sort of self-proving in a sense. Now, if mathematics is end quote, if mathematics is based on intrinsically true or self-proving statements, like 1 plus 1 equals 2, that no one can prove but it's true, why do we have to call that an intrinsic truth if we can see it with our eyeballs? Anyone who doubts that one pen set next to another pen equals 2 pens can be put into a home for the criminally insane, possibly. And he's not willing to accept that as a basis. He has to have some sort of abstract ideas be the basis, some knowledge, he calls it, to be the basis of knowledge. For him, empirical data is over there, and knowledge is over here. Empirical data is messy and can't do much for you. Knowledge is some sort of exalted something. And he just doesn't realize there is no knowledge without empirical data. And there is no such thing as knowledge that doesn't reduce to empirical data. String theory, for example, is not knowledge. That's fantasy because it doesn't reduce to empirical data. So, we have that ironed out a bit. He thinks that we have to have something besides empirical data to prove the basis of knowledge to go from there. So then he says at 3 minutes and 30 seconds, quote, empirical data is not knowledge itself, end quote. Yes, it is. Empirical data actually is nothing but knowledge. It is the only type of knowledge that exists. So, as we've gone over, there is absolutely no valid knowledge or useful knowledge or real knowledge or true knowledge. All those would apply. That is not reduced to empirical data. All knowledge, valid, real, true, and useful, reduces to empirical data. That's true. Because if it didn't, that would mean that it reduces, it's not tied to reality. Because empirical data simply means reality. So either knowledge refers to reality or it doesn't. And he insists that it doesn't. What a strange, strange fellow. Okay, so at 4 minutes and 10 seconds he asks, what do we have to add to empirical information to make it knowledge? Now, as I've said, empirical information is knowledge. It's the only type of knowledge. But he says it's not knowledge, and what needs to be added to make it knowledge. So here you've got some evidence from reality, and you have to add, quote, some additional premises to grant the truthhood. And this additional premises can't be empirical. So you've got empirical knowledge. You cannot just glue some more empirical knowledge on to make it true. You have to have some premise that makes the empirical knowledge true. See, it's not true that 1 plus 1 equals 2 until we can grant some premise to it. I mean, this is crazy. What does he mean? What could these things mean? So here's the premise. It cannot be simply another premise, and it cannot just be empirical knowledge. Quote, so what's left? It must be a priori. End quote. His logic has eliminated reality and all conclusions from reality. Therefore, neither reality nor conclusions from reality can be the answer. And so it must be a non-reality, supernatural realm of ideas that aren't connected to reality. Well, your logic is impeccable, sir. Give me a break. That's ridiculous. Why is empirical knowledge not knowledge? That's what he's hung up on. It is. Empirical knowledge is the only type of knowledge. Then he says laughingly, oh my God, at 5 minutes and 35 seconds, he says, the premise that all knowledge is empirical knowledge is itself a priori. So I'm getting this a priori idea that 1 plus 1 equals 2, and then I put these pens next to each other, and that's an a priori claim or an a priori knowledge that 1 plus 1 equals 2. And the only reason, according to JohananRaatz, that I can recognize that this is 2 pens next to each other is because I have the idea, the Platonic floating idea of 2 in my head. Two-ness is there. I know about two-ness. Therefore, when I see two-ness occur, I can recognize it. Well, now that's just ridiculous. Actually, I can count. I learned to count as a child, and when I see 2 items next to each other, I can count. That's what it is. It's not a priori. I have sensory perception, and there's a reality for me to perceive. That's all it is. Platonists are so baffled by reality, by putting in all these extra things, they come about and reality they just don't know what they are looking at anymore. Oh dear. Around 7 minutes he mentions Gödel's incompleteness theorem. 7 minutes and 35 seconds is where he mentions the 2 mathematicians trying to prove 1 plus 1 equals 2. Well, about Gödel's which I've addressed, about Gödel's incompleteness theorem, I have listened to documentaries on mathematics and on physics. I've heard his incompleteness theorem mentioned. I listened to a documentary about the incompleteness theorem itself and Gödel's life, and I have not heard anything to make me think that he did anything valid or useful. Apparently he dealt with infinities of infinities, which is a stupid concept because you can't get bigger than a number which has no limit. So you can't say, I've got a number without a limit, and I'm going to multiply it by a number without a limit. You're not going to get any bigger than the number you first had. He was obviously schizophrenic or suffering from syphilis. He was a mental case. It's no wonder that he is the mathematician that the 20th century would be fascinated with. There probably are mathematicians like David Bohm, maybe, who should be listened to and studied. And there are probably mathematicians of the 1800s, probably Faraday. We could probably be studying him instead of idiots like Gödel. So until I am able to do some research on it and find anything that makes any sense about it, I just have to dismiss it as the disintegration of the intellectual scene. That Gödel and his nonsense would be taken seriously and listened to and taught in university and stuff. That's what I think of as incompleteness theorem. And I have looked into it. I just cannot find anyone who says anything sensible about it. The one professor said that Gödel had found that by playing with these infinities, you have to be careful because they can suddenly reach out and bite you, and you have to be careful with these infinities. So if that's all that it's about, then I don't have anything to say about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It's just ridiculous. All right. At 9 minutes and 30 seconds, his closing statement. If you dispense with Platonic forms, which I do, then you'll be forced to view math as a social construct. Why would that be? Because we just agree that this and this equals this many of these now? It's not a social construct. I can do it without other people around. I can do it without Platonic forms. All knowledge comes down to or starts with things like 1 + 1 = 2. Things fall when you throw them up in the air unless you throw them really hard, and humans aren't powerful enough to do that, so things fall when you throw them up in the air. If you stop breathing, you die. You know, these basic facts of reality constitute the basis of all knowledge. Any useful knowledge comes back to them. So you can't defend Platonic forms, Johann. You can only just mess around and babble, and that's all that you've done, I'm afraid. I hope that my video has been more meaningful and coherent. So on to the next round of the debate if you're willing to go again, and I don't know if there's anything you have to say that I'd be willing to respond to.